Hi, welcome back to my channel. I think either I'll just put this at the end of my other narcissist video, or whether this be a whole other video in itself. So I think it's really an interesting concept, and even though it's related to narcissism, this isn't a narcissistic channel, as in like this isn't a narcissistic information channel, and I don't want it to be, because I think I much more enjoy doing videos that sort of more surround my life, and that's kind of the thing I want to sort of be posting, obviously. But I do think posting like the odd video about stuff like this is really helpful, and that's why they're usually quite long, so I like to put it all in one video. But this is one facet of narcissism that really hits home with me, and just is something that is very, interesting to me to know, and just really help push me into the thrive area of healing from narcissistic abuse. So if you're new to all that, then, but it's also something that I think you can just apply to anyone, whether you want to diagnose them or have any information on narcissism or not. But it is obviously about narcissists, which is how in some relationships which are toxic, and people sort of have a negative influence on you or whatever, often you can be sort of starved of, and it's quite well known in narcissistic relationships that you're sort of starved of emotional intimacy, or because I'm getting onto it, the whole thing is about intimacy in narcissistic relationships, but there's a reason for that, because they can't show it, and this is the reason. So sex can seem like quite something that's just like, the best part of the relationship, because it's not necessarily that the sex is extra good, because sex is actually an expression of feelings and intimacy. It's not necessarily intimacy itself, but it can feel like it is, because that's the only sort of like form of intimacy that's kind of that, like, present in, or perceived intimacy, like it should be intimate, even though, obviously sex is usually intimate anyway. But it's a case of, that's this, but narcissists are intimacy phobes, okay? They've spent their entire lives trying to hide who they are, and that's something that I discuss in my other video. But it's a case of exposure in terms of intimacy to a narcissist. Exposing their true self is very scary to them, because they're obviously, like, their vulnerability is that they are inadequate, and it's not like a sense of inadequacy that would be logically sort of validated by a healthy person to say, yeah, I feel inadequate in this area, let's sort of like move to trying to become uninadequate. They just, not narcissists, the whole point, it's a very complex topic, but narcissists don't have, I'm going to relate it to this, idea of vampirism. They talk about narcissistic vampires. Their inadequacy is their vulnerability, and that is what they are trying to hide intrinsically to that disorder. So exposure to a narcissist is really scary, and the idea of intimacy, because they believe that other people should be perfect. Like, their standard is like everyone needs to be perfect. Along with this, they don't really see other people as human beings. They see them as tools and objects for their own regulation, and like a platform to abuse, etc. And this woman put it quite nicely in that, I didn't think about it like this, but you are like a representation of their feelings. There's this idea of, I don't really want to get into all the logistics again, but giving a bit of backstory might help if you're interested in this topic. But it's a case of, it might help you discern from relationships, even if you're not that into narcissism and learning about it and stuff, or you're not really in that place. It can make a lot of sense though for dealing with toxic people. Like, you're a representation of their feelings. So they talk about this but take it personally, but don't personalize it, because they run on lies. That's kind of how they operate. And just because someone says something about you, it's that idea of just because someone says something about you doesn't make it true. And even though that's always been true, I feel like as human beings get more clever and realize, obviously, things like narcissism is a prevalent thing, that they don't, you're a representation of their feelings. If they're feeling bad, you're bad. If they're feeling good, you're good. And that's just the way it is, because they don't have that intimacy. And another reason is because they don't know or trust themselves, because they are unable to be vulnerable with themselves. That's the whole point. In order to overcome this, they have to put all their dysregulation on other people. So they're unable to sit with themselves even, so therefore they don't know themselves, they can't trust themselves, they can't accept themselves, they can't love themselves or others, because they say you can't love yourself until you can't love another person until you love yourself. So they can't share themselves in that way, and when you don't share yourself, there's no love or intimacy there, because the vulnerability that's shown in narcissistic patterns is then triggered when the vulnerability is shown. And it also, and then it just gives you this idea of not an idea, it's the fact of they don't want to know you, and you don't, and they don't know you because they can't connect to you in that way. So often when people go into narcissistic relationships, they assume that they have that level of intimacy that they are able to have as a healthy person without narcissistic traits. Or sorry, everyone has narcissistic traits, but when people have high narcissistic traits, people don't assume that they can't connect in that way. So just kind of go into it with sort of a mindset that they would with a healthy person, or someone that doesn't exhibit really, really high narcissistic traits or have this disorder or have like high levels of narcissism. And the fact is they don't connect to you in that way, and they don't want to either, they don't really care to, but what they do is they reflect you back at you. So this comes to a good place of when you distance yourself from that relationship, or the relationship ends for whatever reason, there's discard from you or them, or you're just moving on in whatever way, you're not losing anything. I've heard that a loss of a toxic person is a gain, so always, so that's always good to keep in mind. And you haven't lost anything either, because I've mentioned in the past your intrinsic energy and like spirit stays the same regardless of a toxic person anyway. But there is no connection at all really. They just mirror you, and they idealize people, so often that's what you're enjoying about the relationship. But again, it comes maybe from not necessarily lies. They're idolizing real tangible things about you, but it's an idealization state rather than a genuine one. My camera's about to stop, so I'm going to end the video here, but thanks for listening.